This week, John and Eric from RackTop Systems join us for our feature interview. John Strand makes a triumphant return to Enterprise Security Weekly after being on the road for several months in a row, it feels like. And the security news this week, Enterprise Security News, we're going to talk about Malwarebytes, Lastline, Duo Security, Firemon, Varonis, InAuth, and more. So stay tuned for this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
I'm a tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot.
Even if you've got experience in security, you can benefit from going to somewhere and learning about that bug again. Wearing my tactical turtleneck just for Mr. John Strand, who is on the lines via Skype. John, welcome to the program.
I'm wearing the tactical fleece as well, Paul. This is
Excellent.
A fully, completely, and utterly tactical show.
Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs in-command SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. In-command SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/security weekly and request to see in-command SOAR live in action. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/security weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer's sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to this edition, episode 93 of Enterprise Security Weekly for Wednesday, May 30th, 2018. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, coming at you live from G-Unit Studios, on the lines via Skype from his home in South Dakota, or at least one of his offices in South Dakota. Mr. John Strand is here with us. John, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I came from a lot of travel. I got my B-Sides Charm shirt from Baltimore because that was an awesome conference, and I decided I'm doing the show today from our intern bay, and I find things like this in the intern bay, where it's this nice little poster that says "Nobody cares, existence is meaningless," and also whatever the hell this thing is.
That's super creepy.
But it is unbelievably creepy. But I think what it does show is that morale is in fact high at Black Hills Information Security.
That looks like the doll, like you have to put that on your desk if you make a mistake. Kind of thing. I was at a company where that was like a brick.
Yeah,
you know, that looks like something like that.
Very, very accurate.
Oh boy. A couple of quick announcements. In fact, just one. Speaking of conferences, as John was just talking about some conferences that he's attended recently, ticket sales are now open for the Social Engineering Rhode Island conference that is happening on June 16th in Newport, Rhode Island, actually, on the Salve Regina campus. and that is se-ri.org. I will be presenting, as well as Chris Hadnaghi, April Wright, and others. It's definitely a conference you want to check out. I mean, you get to come to Newport, Rhode Island in June. I mean, what's better than that? It's beautiful that time of year. So make sure you go to se-ri.org. We're also giving away 2 free tickets to SERI, and all you have to do is send a meme of myself and Larry Pesce. It can include other people, but it has to include myself and Larry Pesce. Submit that meme, email it to us at psw@securityweekly.com, and we'll be holding some type of raffle or judge the entries on a very scientific level to determine the best meme that was sent to us with Paul and Larry, and then the winner will receive those 2 tickets so you can take yourself and a friend or significant other. Because who doesn't want to come to Newport in the summer? Anyway, our feature interview for today, I'd like to introduce Eric Bednash and Jonathan Halstuch. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Had me sweating the pronunciation. So Eric is the CEO and co-founder of RackTop Systems, and John is the Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of RackTop Systems. Welcome, guys, to the studio.
Thanks for having us.
It's wonderful to have you here. I wanted to just start off with a little bit about your backgrounds and kind of how you came to found RackTop Systems.
So I'll go first.
John, you go first, because we did an interview on for Business Security Weekly. So
I'm Jonathan Halstuch. I'm one of the co-founders of RackTop, and I actually met Eric when we were working on kind of the customer side of data and data security, and we kind of just felt a lot of times that the solutions out there were good, but they were pretty complicated, often took a lot of work to get them implemented. It was hard to get them implemented correctly, and so we wanted to come up with a solution that was easy to use, was easy to consume, and that was an enjoyable experience for the customer. And so I like the idea of building a company and a product company that could scale, and so I teamed up with Eric based on our previous experience having a lot of success working on projects together on the customer side of the table, and so far it's been a great journey.
Awesome. And, I don't think Eric's mic is live for some reason. Talk again, Eric. Hold on, I have a tech. Oh wait, try to.
So that's why I didn't answer.
There you go.
I was talking, you didn't hear me.
That was an awesome
really
answer, Eric. Thanks for that.
And that's about all I have to say about that. Started my career in the commercial sector. Spent a big chunk in the DoD intelligence world for a while. And, as Jonathan mentioned, we had worked together and spent a lot of time on the customer side, pulling together different technologies and dealing with the challenges associated with that, and the amount of people and teams it took to implement those solutions. And, really, when we founded RackTop, really our vision was to build something that was easy, can be implemented quickly and easily, and solve the problem. And here you go. That's where we are today.
And it's all about the data. Right, and just to give our listeners and John some of the background, right? I mean, really the problem is you're trying to protect your data, and what better place to do that than where the data lives, essentially.
Right, exactly. Yeah, because, I mean, people do all these other things. You're protecting your network, you're protecting your endpoint devices, but essentially the reason you're doing all that is so that nobody's manipulating, stealing, or destroying the data you have.
Right. And just to give our listeners some background, it can be hardware, so you can purchase the storage solution from you, or it can be software. It also integrates with the cloud and other storage devices as well, correct?
Right, that's correct. It's kind of it creates an ecosystem, and so the secret sauce in what we've developed is the software that runs on top of x86, commodity hardware using high-performance drives, flash, whatever. But then we have a management framework that allows you to move the data between systems and also move data to the cloud so that you can protect the data wherever it lives, whether it's on premises in a NAS type solution you would put in your own data center, or as you're moving data to the cloud.
And so one of the things that it comes up in a lot of discussions about enterprise security solutions is I end up in, John, I know you do this probably in some of your EINS calls and talks and SANS teaching, right? Is a lot of it is the underpinnings are, well, you have to know like what data you have and where it lives, the sensitivity levels of those data, of that data, and then who has access to that data and who doesn't. And so many organizations just aren't even close to being able to answer those questions. And when I was learning about your solution, I was like, wow, that can really help with that problem. Of course, you have to do some data discovery and defining things on your own, but actually implementing it is basically what your solution is allowing at a very high level, correct?
Exactly. So it's a very quick time to value. It's very easy that once you put your data on the system, you can quickly discover where you have data, the staleness of the data, and the sensitivity of the data. So, you know, traditionally when we're going and talking to a customer and they're interested in, you know, purchasing storage just for the purposes of storage, it's hard for them to even say how much storage they need because they don't actually have a good comprehension of where they have data and how much of the storage they have they're utilizing, because it's all these different silos. What we're trying to do is, even if you have multiple systems or you have the cloud and on-premise, giving you one single pane of glass to see all of that, and then making it easy to discover where your data is, how it's being used, how often it's being accessed, and who it's being accessed by. And not just giving you kind of static reports, which is traditionally what you see in solutions, but an interactive interface that you can see who has access to this data. And if you discover right there through one of the compliance reports there's a problem, you can remove access for that user right away, versus kind of these static Excel spreadsheets that even we had to use previously because there weren't tools that were interactive and kind of acted, you know, were part of the solution. So we tried to build all that into the solution rather than also have to cobble together multiple different pieces of software and packages to create that view.
Yeah.
So does it,
go ahead, John.
does it also incorporate any kind of like user behavioral analytics where if somebody is trying to overuse their account or an account is being abused, trying to pull down tons of data that they don't normally do, does it have that type of alerting built into it as well? Because right now, that type of analysis on file servers just is really lacking across most enterprises.
And I was going to ask the same exact question. Like, so when John's team breaks into a company, takes over an account, and accesses more data than usual,
right,
you flag that, right?
Yeah, so we have a user behavior engine that's collecting, you know, how users are accessing data. So what they're doing, how they're doing it, at the times of day they're doing it, and the patterns that they're using to access that data. And so you get a very clear fingerprint of kind of how a user interacts on a day-to-day basis, right? It becomes very clear, you know, when someone or something is doing something that's normal or abnormal. And so we can bring those protections directly into the data system, but then also feed that data out to other systems and complete that security ecosystem that you'd actually be able to stop you know, data exfiltration or something that exhibited an out of the norm, you know, behavior.
And what I like about that is it hits some of the insider threat concerns as well as an external threat actor, correct?
Exactly, because there's a lot of factors that you can tie in to determine if it's abnormal behavior. Things like, hey, this user doesn't normally access it from these locations, so maybe it's a compromised machine or account. You can also tie it to the sensitivity or types of data too, right? Because, you know, you might be, a lot of times they'll talk about, oh, they're downloading an unusually high number or volume of data. That may be a big deal, but it might just be they're looking at a lot of images and graphics, whereas a small, very sensitive spreadsheet, you want it to trigger on sooner than those. And so being dynamic and analytical about that and tying multiple factors in gives you a better, higher fidelity metric to determine if there is a true threat. And it does work both for the insider threat, like the known credentialed user, as well as the malicious attacker that's compromised an account or is trying to hack in.
Yeah, I mean, it almost doesn't need to make the distinction, right? It's basically based on the user's behavior, whether that account is compromised or not.
Right, and you could do, and because that's a real big challenge too, is like the slow, stealthy leaks. Those are harder to detect in a normal, just looking at traffic patterns. But something like this, you would be able to determine that because of the abnormality of where the direction of traffic and how it's being accessed.
And then you also allow users to control how the data is shared, and that's been a big headline recently, right? And it's a very common occurrence. I mean, even in our small company, we like, oh, we're working with this new company, and now we have to share data, and how do we do that securely? And then how do we put limits around that? And that those could be time-based limits. Those could be any number of different kinds of limits. And your solution provides a facility to do that.
Right. I think the first thing everyone wants to be able to handle is kind of least privileged access, right? You want to be able to make sure that only the people that really need to see this have the access to it. And then building in workflows so that a user can grant access for a temporary or permanent case to the person that's doing that, and it can be reviewed. And then later on, it can also be audited to see, yes, these people had privilege to it, and did they actually see it? Which also is a big part of legal discovery type cases where you want to only share as the minimum amount of data that you need to.
One use case that I was considering is in the security vendor space, and I'm sure it's like this in every industry, right? There's a price list floating around somewhere. Like everyone, I mean, you guys have right? Yeah. You have a price list of what you charge, right? And you don't want your competitors. I mean, it's probably going to leak, but you want to control it as tightly as you can and be able to educate and provision access to that, because when it's a price sheet, I mean, lots of people are going to internally need access to that. Maybe some permanently, maybe some temporarily. But is that a good use case? Do you see stuff like that?
Yeah, well, I mean, with our price list, we have to use an algorithm to figure it out. So we obfuscate all the data.
There you go.
So you never know. But yeah, no, I mean, it's any data really that's that's relevant to the organization. And whether it be price list or whether it be something is customer records or personally identifiable information, right? The risk associated with that data getting into the wrong hands. Or being exposed, through a breach or something of that matter. It's that all kind of goes into that same bucket of what you're really trying to prevent, and protect from an enterprise perspective. And so, I think that, all of the controls around the data are really for that reason, right? It goes back to, the originals. We want to protect the data where it lives, right? And so we spend a lot of time looking at data from the outside in. Or looking at security from the outside in, right? But by putting those controls, and not just from a restriction perspective, but also from a reporting and awareness perspective, as close to the data as possible, helps you achieve those goals and those protections, so that things like price list or PII doesn't sort of end up in the wrong hands.
And that gets into kind of an interesting question, a much larger question. Why is it that you think so much focus in this industry has been on malware and the endpoint, and very, very, very few products actually stand up in this space of actually trying to get into this data protection, aside from like your standard encryption tools? Why do you think that this has been so long for the industry to actually start looking at it in a more serious way?
Yeah, I'll take the first crack at this one. I think that, people sort of think about what's the easiest path for malware to sort of get into the enterprise, right? And it's through the end user, and so I think that there's been a lot of focus trying to protect somebody's endpoint device from leaking something into the network, but I kind of think that falls short in a lot of ways, because there's it's inevitable that something is going to find its way in. You have an APT, or something's going to somehow, someone's not going to plug their laptop in and it's going to go nuts and steal I mean, that'd be super obvious to spot, right? It's going to be something that's a lot more stealthy. And the only way you could address that stuff is if you have something that is sort of continually able to look at this from a different perspective. But I just think that, sort of the security industry by nature has sort of address this problem. If you look at firewalls and then IPS, IDS, it's kind of like work its way in, and the endpoint is kind of that natural progression. And but you kind of hit a space there where it can't be any more effective unless you have something coming from the inside out. And so I think that we're there's enough awareness and compliance, and we talked a little bit about GDPR, and it's a big deal this week, of course, and you have regulation and increased security and increased awareness from the enterprise perspective, and there's a change in thinking there, and there also has to be a change in thinking of sort of how you solve these problems, and I think we're starting to see that.
And but you do start to see that, though.
Yeah.
And the reason why I'm harping on this is it seems like every single episode of the show, there's a new endpoint security product out there that has a new variation of artificial intelligence or some type of magic sauce. And it seems like when we're talking about investment and capital, it seems like a lot of investment firms are willing to write a tremendous amount of checks to these firms, because I think that they get that. But I don't see a tremendous amount of traction outside of like 4 or 5 endpoint security vendors. Now, when you're talking to customers, do you think the light has finally started going off on many customers that actually protection and monitoring of data as it flows throughout their network is something that they should have been focusing on for a long time? Or are you still kind of facing an uphill battle with the awareness side of it?
I think that they're starting to get they're starting to realize that, hey, that's a better approach. I think a lot of why you also see that you see all these endpoint solutions is more of a lot of the form factor that, okay, in the past, all the money or the budget was allocated to the desktop people, and so they target those groups and organizations that have the money and the budget. You'll see a lot of the companies try to align against where they think they're going to get the customer to pay for a product. And so it might not be the right approach, but these companies still go after it. And I think now you're starting to see that change. What we're seeing is the need for global collaboration with security, and people are trying to figure out how to do that. And you have things like Dropbox or these file sync and shares, and people realize, okay, we can't use endpoint security. It's not effective. It's not going to solve the problems. Now, do you still need virus protection and malware protection? Yeah, but all this other stuff has to be protected from a different location. And the realization that centralizing data and putting your arms around the sensitive data and discovering where your sensitive intellectual property or PII or whatever you're protecting is in an area that you can put your hands around it. So we're definitely seeing the shift in the architecture and the realization that an alternate approach is required.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think IT teams struggle to build a solution that's easy to use and nice as Dropbox. But
right.
That's what they're up against today.
Yeah.
And now you've provided some facilities in your solution to allow IT teams to, I think, catch up to the technology today to give the user a good experience, but also be secure as well.
Right, because I think being on the customer side and running, IT departments where you're doing end user services, you're made out to be the bad guy. You're not letting the user share data on Dropbox or put it on some facility that would be easy for them to share files. And so what we've done is developed a way that you can share data securely in a way that you can audit directly from our storage over the web to people that you want to authorize. And the value of that is you don't have to copy the data or move the data outside your firewall. So you know where the data is. You can audit who's accessed it, just like they were if they were local, and it's very easy to control and turn off when you need to. Once you start to have data leave your control, or even if it's in, cloud's fine, but it has to kind of be within your control, even if it's in a cloud. Once it starts to get out of there, or if a user kind of starts to use shadow IT, you have no idea what's been exposed. And we've seen customers, try to go find out, was this data leaked or was it improperly shared? And usually it has been, and it's just somebody that they're not they don't have any bad intentions, but they're trying to get things done quickly. And so it's not always the fastest path. We want to try to make the most secure path the fastest path, and that's our kind of vision and goal. But sometimes it takes a little bit more effort than just putting it on Dropbox and sharing it.
Yeah, but and I think that is the culture of no, that it will bite us every single time, because while you might block Dropbox, like there's a million other ways to share a file. Now there's millions of other services that you can could share files. So rather than, and there are companies that are looking at your cloud computing or SaaS usage, but I feel like there's always going to be the next thing that's not as effective as just saying, well, I'm going to provide my users with a way to share it, and that's not always necessarily secure, but your monitoring point is really where you need to be, because you can control it to a certain and audit it, right?
Right, exactly. So it becomes kind of the single source of record. You can see what's happening and turn it on, and it's within your control. So it's very easy to share files. It's very easy for customers or a client to share files with you, and it's coming to that central place where you are able to apply your standard policies for protection, versioning, snapshots, all that information that you would share, It's one way to do it. You don't have to have multiple tools or multiple ways to think about protecting your data.
Well, and I think with GDPR as well, and likely future compliance and privacy guidelines, keeping your data in the least amount of places possible makes it easier for you as an organization to be in compliance.
Right, because when they say you need to destroy this data now, you got to go look at 20 places or what?
Where is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. John, more questions?
Nope, I'm good.
Talk about encryption, and because I was curious how that plays into your solution. How do you provide users to work encryption into this whole picture?
So, I think encryption is kind of becoming like the first security checkbox when it comes to data, and in our case, data storage. It kind of becomes the new baseline. And it's a good, that's a good baseline to have, right? It's not the only thing, but it's the, it's sort of that foundational component, right? And so in some instances you have, I mean, you have two levels of encryption, right? Depending on what kind of data you're protecting and in what environments. But we kind of look at the data security with in three different layers. So it's like the storage component and encryption is tied into there, and then there's reporting, which is sort of the proof, right? You have to know, be able to report on what you're doing. You have to be able to prove it from a compliance, from a risk perspective, right? You have to have an understanding.
At that hardware level, is that in case someone steals your storage array primarily, or is there other like unauthorized access that encryption can?
It's both, right? And so I think the initially it could be somebody walks away with disks, and sometimes you're like, it's in the data center. What's the probability of that happening? And sure, in those instances it may be lower, but there are a lot of instances. If you think about a movie shoot and an on-location shoot, right? You think about all of that data from multiple 4K, 8K cameras streaming in. That's probably not going on a little portable drive, and even if it was, again, that there's a big risk there, right? A whole day's worth of footage, right? And so all of that's coming into systems and then has to go someplace. And you're probably not pushing that over a wire because you're on location, right? Physical disks have to move. Encryption is very important there.
I swap a drive out, that old drive still could be real, and it depends on your adversary, right?
Exactly, right. Because you think about, people steal movies over the internet. It's just as easy to go, physically grab disk or do. So there's a lot of scenarios. So I think physical security definitely has a role to play in protecting the data there. But then when you sort of take it up another level, and then you're able to secure data based on let's say customer in a multi-tenant environment, right? So you can sort of live in this multi-tenant environment, and everybody kind of has their own additional security controls around that data from an encryption perspective, and then even from multiple levels of security, right? So if you have different environments that maybe it's not different people, but it's different programs or projects that you had to protect from each other again. So you sort of can layer on different layers of encryption, but that's really like the foundational layer of things. And I think that if you do, you have to do encryption, then you have to be able to report on it, and then you also have to be able to control access. And you got to combine those three things together to really, obtain the level of security. And we sort of focus on doing all of those really easily.
So you can encrypt based on a user or user group, and so their data is encrypted with a different key than. So like if I got, and I'm thinking in the case of like large software company, Microsoft or whatever, right? They've got a group they're working on a very like super secret project. Sure, you want to control access, but also encrypt it so that if it does get out, no one else can read it, right?
Right, so you have like a data set level of encryption, which would be a folder, and that could be a specific key, and we can support a bring your own key type model. Or you have the pool, which would be at the hardware level that we're encrypting there. And then we're, of course, encrypting data in motion. So as it's traversing the wire, it's encrypted as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Anything else that you guys wanted to talk about? Features that you wanted to highlight that I might have missed so far?
Well, again, we talked about sort of, our vision, and what we've put together is, kind of completing that security ecosystem by putting, security and compliance as close to the data as possible. So you have, as we talked about the endpoint, right? So what's at the endpoint, what's at the perimeter, and then what's at the data, and as you think about how we're going to solve from an enterprise perspective the challenges that we face moving forward into the next 5 to 10 years. The security threats, they're getting more advanced. They're getting stealthier, and there's no one solution, right? There's no magic pill. There's no there's a NIST cybersecurity framework, 5 functional areas for a reason. You have to do a lot of different things. There's going to be process. You have to have your people tied in, and then you have to have technology, not one technology, but multiple technologies working together to solve this problem. And so, it's kind of that big vision in the role that we play within that by putting the protections directly in the data. We feel is really going to, enable enterprises to get to where they need to be in the future.
I think the other big thing that makes it more secure is basically automation and policy-driven type behavior. So, it's always the person usually ends up being the weak link. They either set it up incorrectly or they're fooled into doing something they shouldn't do.
Easier to use for the user, which means less mistakes, which means a better data security policy.
Exactly. And so the UI really makes it very easy for an end user or anybody to just kind of tell the system what they want to do, and the system does it automatically based on the policies set by IT.
And that's not an easy thing to accomplish, certainly. I mean, I've been around software my whole life, right? Like, it's one thing to create it; it's another thing to make it so that people can actually use it. So, and obviously, you spent a lot of R&D time on that.
Right? Yeah, that's our focus, right? Yeah. So it's kind of centralized governance with end user self-service, and so the users can do what they want to do, but it's meeting the security policies and compliance framework so that the end result is the organization gets what they want.
And it's not 800 tickets, every month to the help desk to say, oh, I need access to that data, I need access to that data, right?
Right, because that's no help desk wants to do those things.
Right, if it's not easy, it's not going to work, right? It's not going to work for the enterprise. So.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
My last question, Active Directory integration. I think we talked about that when we did met before this interview. Just talk to our audience. We're always talking about Active Directory and the lack of security controls and lack of security in general in Active Directory. How do you integrate and help on that front?
Yeah, so we integrate with Active Directory, and so that we can tie into the enterprise directory structure and then leverage the information that's in there. So if you just take it at 10,000 feet, we're able to utilize that same infrastructure, both from a data access control perspective and from an API management perspective, right? So everything's unified, and then our, as Jonathan mentioned, making it easy, single pane of glass, administrative software.
So protection as well. We didn't really talk about that. Yeah. In other words, John's team gets in, users are doing funny things. I can turn off their access to the data.
Oh yeah, okay. yeah. So
how did we gloss over that?
I know.
I thought they did mention it though.
Sure.
We might have, but that I mean that's an awesome feature, and often lacking in monitoring and auditing tools. We talk about SIM and all these other tools, but being able to say activate that protection or disable someone's access.
Right, or someone access the data, and this is the first time they've logged in like 6 months, and now they're touching everything. And there's, I mean. So the indicator, something's not right.
Yeah, and if you go back to those end user behavior analytics, instead of this kind of follow up later, look at the logs passively, we're directly active in inline defense. And so if somebody's an active user and they exceed those thresholds and the analytics tools shut off their access, they can call up because they're an authorized user and say, hey, it's really me. Can you restore my access? Quick investigation, you get them back on. But you've stopped them. If it was a bad actor, they're probably not going to call the help desk.
Right. They might, but for different reasons.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think the other part's the cyber resiliency. Assuming you are going to get hit eventually, how easily is it to recover from something like a malware ransomware attack? And because you have all these policy-driven snapshots, you can quickly go back to a previous version and before the ransomware hit you, and you're back up and running in a couple of minutes. So it's a quick, resilient feature as well.
That's awesome. It's awesome. And you can find out more information at racktopsystems.com and schedule a demo, right?
Yes, that'd be great.
With sales teams. So reach out. Make sure you do that if you're interested. Thank you very much, Eric and John. With that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the security news this week. Stay tuned. Are you looking for high-performance data storage that's easy to use yet secure enough for the Department of Defense? Look no further. RackTop Systems gives business software-defined data storage complete with embedded compliance, security, and data encryption. Don't let cyber threats, regulatory demands, or the complexity and growth of your data overwhelm your business. RackTop's high-performance data management platform gives you the tools you need to address the most demanding data challenges. Think beyond storage. To learn more, visit racktopsystems.com. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ESW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observeit.com/securityweekly. Skeleton keys, golden tickets, forged packs, DC Sync, DC Shadow. The Active Directory attack surface is expanding faster than admins can keep up with. Securing your environment begins with implementing least privilege administrative models, but does not end there. Many organizations send Active Directory syslog events to a SIM platform. However, logs are noisy, of limited scope, and are time-consuming to review and act upon. Active Directory is secure when it's clean, understood, configured properly, monitored closely, and controlled tightly. StealthBits technology provide solutions that monitor, secure, and detect the latest threats against Active Directory. Visit them today at stealthbits.com to learn more. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for teams by visiting itpro.tv/securityweekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Just a couple of quick announcements. Make sure you check out our on-demand material, securityweekly.com/on-demand. The latest one in the on-demand archive is on endpoint security, the state of endpoint security, so make sure you check that out. We mentioned it briefly in our previous segment, so a whole lot more on endpoint security on the on-demand programming. Also on June 14th from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Is a webcast with Logarithm. This is accompanying the recent survey we did. And basically, we'll answer some of the questions about how do you feel about user and entity behavior analytics? What about your SIM? To learn about the answers to those questions and what our poll results were and some analytics into them, tune in on June 14th. It's sure to be a fun time. Alrighty. So, we're going to dig into the enterprise security news. John and Eric are here with me in studio from RackTop Systems. John Strand is still on the lines via Skype. We're going to talk about Malwarebytes has completed a deal to acquire Binasoft, who, from what I gather, allows you to manage the Windows firewall, which is something that I thought Microsoft probably should have provided.
Yeah, should have. I mean,
I'm kind of confused.
Paul, who would have possibly thought that running NetSH ADV firewall set all profile state on was too hard?
Right? Do you need a vent? Isn't that just? Is it just me, John? I don't understand what Binasoft's value was to this problem. Like, in the problem being like I can't effectively manage my Windows firewalls. I don't.
Well, I will say that, all joking aside, the Windows firewall is a train wreck.
Okay.
It's horrible, but you should turn it on anyway. And any AV vendor out there worth their salt, from McAfee to Symantec to Sophos, they all have the ability to enable a firewall with that product. So I honestly look at this as Malwarebytes needed to have that capability for firewall management. They didn't have it. Their competitors had it. Binisoft gives them that capability in their product, and that's the move.
I think that's some great analysis. And recently I was learning about Edgewise. This story kind of reminded me of Edgewise. Have you heard of Edgewise before? it's kind of sort of like that firewall management on endpoints, but it takes it to the application and port layer, right? If you're familiar with Edgewise, John? Yeah, so I kind of thought of that like, if this is a problem and you're looking into it, you should probably consider Edgewise and look into that as it hits it more in the application.
More comprehensive.
Layer. Yeah.
Well,
sure.
and it just, for the people that want to do it on the cheap, you can actually do it with NetSH ADV firewall, where you can actually restrict down to applications, not just ports as well. I wonder how many of these products are just really wrappers for things that are really hard to do with Microsoft under the hood.
You know, I think there's a whole subset of the industry in security, John, that is exactly what you just described, right? Like Microsoft doesn't make it easy enough, so there are vendors that can help you with that. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. Lastline is. Anyone heard of Lastline before?
No.
I've heard of the name.
No.
So I'm not really sure what they do or what makes them different, and I had to really dig. The press release didn't give me enough information. I did some digging on their website. They basically say they automatically collect and analyze isolated events from the perimeter network and endpoint tools to deliver high-fidelity alerts, categorize and consolidate actively to link malicious behavior to define the scope of the attack in a unified view, which is a very general statement, triages threat activity from across the network to identify high-risk incidents. I feel like there's like a few hundred vendors that pretty much that description could fit. And what I struggle with is I want to know what makes Lastline better. And that's kind of my call to usually some random vendor and every single show. Like, you could have the best solution on the planet. I didn't get that from reading the press release or your website. So please let us know. I want to know what your differentiators, because they could do something really awesome. That description is very generic, as you well know, John, right?
So I got a question for you on this, Paul. There was a paragraph that was interesting to me. It said, he pointed out Lastline continues to experience very high growth, increasing revenue by approximately 80% in 2017 over 2016. This was achieved in part by our successful Series C round of funding, which raised $28.5 million. Now,
wow.
Are they using their funding as revenue?
No, probably.
I don't think
if they took a Series C, likely they have customers. I don't think you get to Series C and 28 million without having paying customers.
But it says
which goes back to my original point.
By their Series C funding, it's like what?
If they have customers, someone's using them and liking them, and I want to know why you like them, right? Because it hasn't come across our radar yet. I haven't done a briefing with them, so I thought it was interesting. They came up with a news feed, and there's a lot of security companies out there, and like I said, they could be awesome. Customers, obviously they have them. I'd love to know what they do differently, especially differentiating yourself in this space is really hard, right? I mean, because John, you and I do active countermeasures. Some of what we do it could be covered by that messaging, right? I want to see the differentiated messaging. So I had an article in here about Duo security, and I thought they made some interesting moves lately. It kind of, and I don't want to start rumors, right? But I was just amazed first how successful Duo has been in the market, and I likely think their exit could be the next step is preparing for IPO. And the reasons that I'm theorizing, and I don't have any insider information, I'm not giving stock tips, I'm just basically celebrating the success of Duo because it's a very successful company. And so they raised $70 million in Series D. They're over $1 billion valuation. Surpassed $100 million in annual reoccurring revenue. Like, congratulations, that's phenomenal. They appointed a chief financial officer and recently just appointed their first CMO, Neville Letzerick, who has a background basically WebSense and such. So
serious background. Yeah,
some experienced people holding C-level positions now. Could also mean that their likely next exit or their likely exit could be IPO. I think they're going to probably be the next company IPOing in our space, or one of the next.
Yeah, we use Duo. It's pretty easy. It's been it's a small kind of per user two-factor, multi-factor authentication solution. So it's interesting. What I think is also interesting though is how you stay in the mix, because in the end, any sort of MFA should be kind of just a transparent, seamless thing. So how do you stay sticky?
Yeah. And to speak of the marketing of Duo, and I've seen various marketing efforts, branding efforts from Duo, and they do a great job. The one that resonated me the most was there was a case study about a university that had a big breach and rolled out Duo and kind of chronicled how they did it. I worked in education space before. I know the unique challenges that environment can provide. And it was just a great story. And I was like, wow, that's like the best piece of marketing that I've seen in a really long time. Because now I'm like, yeah, I could recommend that to people because that article showed someone with a problem, solving that problem. And to speak to your point, John, and your messaging as well, like made it easy to implement, deploy that solution.
Well, and sometimes that's all it takes, right? Like, you know, if a product doesn't work in this space, I hear people scream about it. They say that product was ungangly, it was horrible, it was a nightmare to implement. But whenever something works, people just get kind of quiet. And you ask them, like I ask a lot of our customers use Duo. This is one of those vendors that we see consistently in our penetration tests. And it's amazing whenever I talk to the customers, I'm like, hey, what do you think of Duo? They pretty much say, it works.
Right.
And that's about as much praise as you get out of a lot of our customers when they're talking about security products. But this is one that we continue to see. They continue to be implementing it all over the place. And I think it's just because it flat out works. That's all it really needs to do at the end of the day.
Firemon is set to acquire Lumeta. Lumeta is a New Jersey-based provider of cyber situational awareness solutions, and they deliver a complete real-time visibility into the extended network and across all connected endpoints. Not quite sure how they do that. I don't know if anyone here has heard of Lumeta before.
Their website scares the hell out of me. It's got a very, very creepy dude. Dude. He's got yellow eyes. He looks like an evil villain.
There is, yeah.
It's not healthy.
They use the word real time a lot, which it's in their title, it's in their description, it was in their press release. I always think back to this moment in my life when I was sitting in a classroom and Stephen Northcutt was the professor, the teacher, and we were talking about intrusion detection systems. And he's like, a lot of people are saying they do it real time. And he like drew a graph of like time, and he's like, here's real time. Here's the closest you can get to real time in your alerts. It's not the same thing as real time. I don't know. That just stuck with me. And every marketing department I've ever worked with, whenever they bring up real time, I'm like, maybe near real time is the closest. Like I'll get to blessing. So some advice when you do your marketing, right? Real time is not looked upon favorably by the security community, and they use that a lot. And I mean, they're trying to
eliminate 100% of your blind spots, and that's
100%. And real time in your marketing is interesting. And I'm not sure the details of the acquisition were undisclosed. And as we know, and we talk about on Business Security Weekly, you know, there can be a lot of speculation about what was the reason for that exit via acquisition. Sometimes it's a great thing, and I talk to even friends of mine that companies have been acquired, and they're like, it's awesome, dude. And I know they're not just like telling me that. They're like, no, it's a great situation. And then you look at other ones, and you're like, oh, that was an acqui-hire, as we call it, right? Or we're just buying for the technology. We've seen acquisitions where like basically the entire team is wiped out except for a few of the researchers. So hopefully this is a positive acquisition. And Firemon's a much bigger player in the space. And I think one of those players that's really trying to diversify, because I really think that the crux of the issue is that firewall policy management is kind of boring now. And so people want something else, right? John, have you heard of Varonis before?
Yes, I've actually seen Varonis in a couple of engagements. So not actually completely instrumented, but it was on.
So what do they do?
They do a lot of that data loss prevention and also kind of tracking where data is, especially in the cloud. That's what we've seen it. But like I said, as far as it actually being turned on and stopping anything, not yet.
Gotcha.
But that's not to say it's bad or good. It's just people are standing it up and basically trying to get it running.
Yeah, they were presenting in InfoSec Europe, which I believe is happening this week. Is that this week? I think that's this week.
It's another security con because we need more of those.
Yeah, it's like the RSA of Europe, right? And then there's B-Sides London, which happens around the same time or immediately following or in front of that. So Varonis says that they can analyze security from the perimeter by analyzing devices such as DNS, VPN, and web proxies to detect security events. What I like is they gave examples. Usually when we read some of the stuff, like they just stop there.
High level.
But they say brute force attacks, DNS tunneling, and credential stuffing. which are all techniques that you use in your pen test, John. So I thought that was interesting, and you said you saw them on a pen test. So
They were actually, I think, one of our customers. The reason why they went with Varonis, or one of the reasons why, is one of the salespeople at Varonis actually mapped what Varonis does, and they mapped it against the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and they said these are all the different components that we work in, and that as somebody that's in the security vendor space as well, that's actually a pretty good marketing technique. So it was kind of a neat approach.
awesome. This next company called InAuth looks like a competitor to Duo, which I'm not necessarily sure I'd want to be a competitor to Duo. Although everyone finds their niche in the space, certainly. And they have enhanced their two-factor authentication. They say, email and SMS is insecure, and they're able to add a mobile app and strong customer authentication for payment authorizations, logging into accounts, bank transfers, account changes. It sounds like you're more on the provider side rather than the end user side with InAuth, which is probably how they're differentiating.
But it's kind of weird. They say that they don't really like to do the SMS or the other application one, but they do have something okay, great, PIN, and then ownership. So you have to have a specific mobile phone, and then something you have with the biometric. So I'm wondering if they actually integrate with like the fingerprint scanner on like your Android device or on your iPhone as well, which is kind of neat.
It is. I know LastPass does that. LastPass will just go right off your fingerprint. What I find more interesting in the authentication space is, and we did an interview with one of the founders, and I think there's maybe 2 or 3 companies in the space that I know of, and probably more. But his technology could look at how you hold your phone. It looked at maybe the applications you're running on your phone. It looked at what Bluetooth devices you're connected to, what Wi-Fi networks are in range, and basically said, yeah, like you're cool to authenticate, right? So the user doesn't have to remember passwords and PIN codes and two-factor authentication. It was sheerly like machine learning and to a certain extent artificial intelligence that was figuring out that this user is who they claim to be, which is what you're doing in the authentication process, based on all those environmental factors on your phone. I think that is the future. I think that's where we need to be with authentication. And when I see messaging that, as John was reading from this company, talks about basically the traditional methods, I'm like, that's kind of not where it's at, right?
Right. It's that seamless. The user doesn't have to be bothered, right? It's just like Duo. They don't want it. It works. They don't think about it unless there's a problem. Right. And so you just want to have it. Yeah, I saw one similar to that with ambient sound. It would just turn your phone on to see if it matched, and it looked like you were with your phone. And
yes,
all that kind of stuff.
That is another factor as well.
That's not creepy at all.
There have been some creepy stories around listening.
I have gone through my Alexa history just recently just to see what was happening.
I did. I made a Facebook post about my shopping list, and because we have one of my devices here in the studio, so when my friends visit, I had some very interesting things on my shopping list, including daughter. Like I don't know if my wife was trying to order a daughter. We have 3 boys. I get it. We both want a girl and all, but I don't know if she was trying to order that on Amazon. So this final article that I had here wasn't related to a vendor, but talked about 6 ways third parties can trip up your security. And in the survey with the Ponemon Institute, which you all know how Jack Daniel feels about that, whatever, but one big issue of the survey respondents identify is the lack of visibility into the security status of third-party networks and systems. And third parties have access to increasing amount of enterprise data. More than half of the respondents in the survey have no inventory of all the external people accessing their networks and data. Well, how nicely does that tie into your messaging?
I can help them with that.
Yes. So this may be one you want to check out. They did the survey. Yeah. And typically these surveys are sponsored. We did a sponsored survey for Logarithm, certainly. And it's all about how you ask the questions, right, in the survey. And I feel like sometimes they ask questions that are self-serving to whoever's sponsoring it. But that aside, this is a problem. And we didn't talk about it in the context of your data security as it relates to a third party. Like we talked about a user who's purposely sharing out some data. But what if a third party needs direct access to your data?
Yeah, you have to come up with a way to limit their exposure, right? You don't want them throughout your network. You only want to expose exactly what you want to expose, and you want to be able to control and audit that. You know, I've always used the analogy of your home alarm and a safe, right? you're going to have a home alarm that's going to prevent intruders, but you're going to let people that you don't trust as much in your home. And so they're going to be walking through your house, whether it's, a handyman or babysitter or whatever. So you're going to keep your, valuables maybe in a safe, and we're kind of that safe for your data. So you want to protect that.
It's actually a great analogy. I'm usually not a fan of the home security analogy, but in that case, I thought that's perfect analogy for what we're talking about here. Yes. So I have this talk that I'm working on in the back of my head that's the best ways to use analogies, the right and wrong ways to use analogies in security, because we've all seen the analogies, and sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, right. Sometimes it's somewhere in between, right? So, John, anything else to add?
Nope, I'm good.
And you're around for the entire summer.
Yes, I'm around right up until Sandsfire, and then right up until Sandsfire, and then I go from Sandsfire to Black Hat to DEF CON, and it gets kind of crazy again.
Awesome. Well, Eric and John, the John here in studio, thank you for appearing on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. John Strand, thank you as always. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching to this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. We'll see you next time.